What's up YouTube, and welcome back to Homebrew Subaru. In this episode I'm going to continue on with the engine's electrical harness and try and route it through the firewall. So what's up everyone, hope you had a good Canada Day weekend or July the 4th weekend. The engine harness, I've spent quite a few hours getting this thing reattached. I have most of it done, but there's a few circuits that I'm kind of unsure of, and instead of just like laying it into the car and hoping that it works, I'm gonna have to reattach some of it just to triple check some circuits. The other thing is the harness that's coming through the firewall on the passenger side, I really do have to try and get that to push through because there's just not a lot of room to go through the hole, and I just figured it would be a cleaner look anyway. So this harness, we'll just go over it quickly here. So all the circuits, these are the ECM connectors here, the 3 white connectors, and all of these harnesses coming off in this direction are basically all the car side. So it's stuff from extra connections for like the transmission control module, which we don't have to worry about, to the data link connector, to fuel tank pressure and gauge kind of stuff. So there is quite a few things that I'm gonna have to kind of sort through later on, and most of it's probably not going to be needed. I am going to want to put a data link connector on it though. And then coming off the connectors coming this way is the engine side of things. So these are where most of my connections are made. Yes, I went ahead and just used electrical tape because that's what Subaru does, and just don't worry about it. Yes, heat shrink would have been the best way to go, but I'm cheap like that sometimes. So these are the 2 bulk connectors going to the engine, and the one for the O2 sensor harness. There's literally only one wire on the O2 sensor harness that needs to go to ground, and it's usually done on the inside of the vehicle, but I'm pretty sure I could do it wherever I like. And then a few circuits coming off the bulk connectors. One is actually for ECT, which goes direct to the gauge, and then there is a few grounds, and I know there's a circuit for maybe the evap solenoid. So a couple other things I need to check, and I believe this yellow and blue is our main battery positive for fuel injectors. So as you can see, it's still kind of a mess, and there's a few more things I want to check, but I can start kind of getting it together and possibly putting some lume on it and placing it into the car so that I can start figuring out the rest of it. Okay, so I've spent another probably close to 2 hours just finishing up things here. I have the bulk connectors all completely wired now, except for these 2 black and yellow circuits, which I only have one black with yellow circuit coming off the ECU left. And I've determined this one coming on from the ECU is for coolant sensor grounds, ECT ground. But the one stray wire coming off the bulk connector, I wasn't able to identify in this wiring diagram. So I went to another known diagram I have. So I know this older diagram is a little bit difficult to understand, but if we look at it, this is the engine computer, and these are our sensors. This square box here is actually the bulk connector, and I've been able to identify the black and yellow wire leading from the engine coolant temperature sensor directly to the ECU. So that is the one connection. I've found the other black and yellow wire coming out of the bulk connector, but the reason it's not going to the ECU is it actually wraps around here to a sensor ground location underneath the passenger kick panel. So that's the reason I can't find where it goes, and it's actually for the throttle position sensor. So it's probably easier for me to disconnect this connector and ohm out that wire to the 2 black and yellow wires once I have it connected to the harness on the engine, and then I should be able to determine which wire's which and solder them correctly. And in between the harness, in about this section right here, There was obviously some T's and splices coming out of the harness and a secondary piece of harness coming out this direction. So I've got main battery positive from the main relay to power on the ECU and the fuel injectors. There's also a 15 amp hot when running or starting circuit that needs to be hooked up. And then it's got also my, like, to go to the ECT, or like coolant gauge and the oil pressure light. But I'm going to start wrapping this up and getting it back into the car. Okay, so it's a few hours later and I've got the harness in place. I went ahead and got loom over the whole thing, as you can see it probably in the thumbnail. And this bigger section in here is where all the solder joints are, so there's actually two pieces of loom, one going one way and one the other, just to make sure everything's covered really well. The original harness that I had bunched up in the corner here, I was able to get through and start stabbing in all around there, and I finally got it in through the firewall, so it's still in the car, but it's not really visible anymore. I've got all the bulkhead connections all loomed and taped up really well, and the two going to the actual engine harness are hooked up. I still need to get front O2 sensor, and we still need to do some exhaust work here anyway. So the rear O2 sensor will have to go that way. I might have to do some extending of that harness, but that's it for out here. The harness will be kind of retained over here, or I'll make a little insulated bracket to kind of retain it on the engine block there, or the head. But yeah, it's come together really well, and I'm really pleased on the way that it finished up out here. So just a quick look underneath the passenger side here where everything's come through. Everything's really nice and long enough so the connectors come down quite far, and I'll be able to reach up and plug them in, and it'll give me access to them. And the wiring coming down here, most of it's not going to be used, but it's definitely long enough that I'll be able to kind of sort through it and put it where it needs to be. And then this extra little, this is the teed off harness for those couple extra connections that were not long enough, and I had to kind of make my own little harness. So that drops in behind the ventilation box, and these ones down in front. And I think everything's going to be plenty long enough to get attached properly. So realistically, there's still quite a bit more wiring to go through. Everything underneath the dash, so I need to get power up to the ECU and kind of get it hooked up on a relay, and then some of the circuits over to the instrument cluster, and then underneath here the hood to get some grounds and a couple other circuits probably going into that factory WRX harness, and then going through fans and everything, whatever, you know, that kind of stuff later on. But yeah, so I'm just glad that it turned out the way that it did, and that it is done, because that was a really big job, and I spent a lot of time on it, getting that harness back together from being cut right into two pieces. But if you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up, and if you're new here and you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button for me. Leave your questions and comments further down below, and I'll see you in the next one.